If Lulu was murdered, says Shrek, while the cars whished by them and rain glittered in the gutters at their feet, and you know something, you might be in danger from the killer too. This invoked a tiny, complacent, scathing smile. Rochelle did not think she was in danger. She thought she was safe. The entire thing doesn't sit right with Shrek, as you might expect. He thinks that Rochelle is lying to him about her current work and that everything about her seemed phony somehow. Hello and welcome to Comprehension Point's video Snark. If you came here because you thought that this was an audiobook, please stick around and maybe learn some reading and listening comprehension skills. I read books, discuss what went wrong, and how they can possibly be fixed. I'm continuing my read-through of The Cuckoo's Calling by Robert Galbraith. Now the first video, go check out the others, links are posted below. This book contains harsh scenes that some people might find upsetting. Viewer discretion is advised. Chapter 24. So John is here now, and things are beyond awkward between Tony and John. Shrek continues to try and get some info about Lula's final day from both of them, but it's obvious that John is kind of holding back because of his uncle's presence. It is beyond weird how little that Tony actually wants things to be looked into. Like, if anybody actually thought that Lula really did off herself, why not simply let John uncover that for himself? I've been thinking about this for a while, but with the introduction of Tony, I'd like to kind of examine something. It hasn't been in the book quite yet, except for one glaringly obvious thing. The book's title. For those of you who don't know, the cuckoo bird is a bird famous for going into another bird's nest, pushing out the other eggs, and leaving one of their own. And the fact that Lula is adopted in connection with the way that Tony is acting, as well as how Yvette is said to have reacted towards her own daughter, is kind of making me ask a few questions about what was really going on with this family. Anyway, Strike continues to ask Tony about his visit with Yvette the day Lula died and meeting his niece at his sister's place. John was there too, but Tony says that John was busy working and didn't want to bother him. Strike is kind of hung up over why that is. After leaving his mother's place, Lula tried to call her uncle multiple times over the course of the afternoon. Tony insisted that it couldn't have possibly been anything of actual importance and insists that it was an odd behavior from Lula. John agrees, although his statement seems almost forced, so I'm not quite sure that I take his word for it. However, as soon as Strike brings up Lula's attitude upon leaving the building, as reported by Kieran, Tony is quick to say a lot of unsavory things about Kieran, including the color of his skin. He throws money onto the table and storms off. The rest of the meal is skipped over, and Strike and John start to walk back to the law office together. As they go, John is like, "My uncle is kind of a racist," as if we couldn't have picked up on that from the way he'd said something disrespectful of Kieran simply because he was less white than Tony found acceptable. As John talks a little about his own father, he then asks Strike why he doesn't use his own father's name. Strike explains that he was the result of an affair that caused his dad his third marriage and a lot of money on child support. They don't talk, but also says that he doesn't mind that John told Tansy who Strike biodad is, so long as it netted him the interview with her. John goes on saying that Yvette and Tony never saw eye to eye in regards to her children. Yvette, Tony, and Alec had a huge falling out, and Alex kicked his brother-in-law out after a huge row following Charlie's death. That the two siblings only reconnected after Alec died. Strike then asks to be put in contact with somebody, and John agrees to try. That the fashion designer loved Lula, so she would probably be eager to help in any way. Next, Strike asks about Lula's bio mom. John never met the woman, but according to both Lula as well as the papers, she's a, quote, dreadful woman. That mummy dearest, Marlene Higson, told her daughter that her biodad was an African student, which clearly fed into Lula's childhood dream that she was some sort of long-lost tribal princess. The book's words, not mine. John goes on to say that he'd gotten into a fight with Lula over the timing of her tracking down her bio mom, since this was around the time Yvette got her uterine cancer diagnosis. And I'm not adopted, but I kind of understand Lula's desire to find out where she actually comes from, but I also agree with John that it was really tacky timing on Lula's part. He goes on to say that it wasn't so much about Marlene so much as it was wanting to try and find her black biodad, to find out why it was that she was black, where she comes from, all that stuff. That he knew Lula had still been in contact with Marlene, but was trying not to be, but somehow still trying to find her dad. John blames Marlene for selling some of her contact with Lula to the press. Strike then takes John back to later that afternoon when he's swung by Lula's flat to give her the latest contract with Soleil. He asks if John saw any sort of workman there, possibly in the middle flat, working on something in that unit. John agrees that he did see somebody like that with Wilson, but both of them didn't really register. He thinks that the man might have been white, but wouldn't swear on it. Shrek isn't sure if that's of an importance, so tells John not to worry too much about it. He then asks about Lula's fortune and whether John inherited it or not. This is based off of the other model Sierra's words about her friend. John seems to think that since John and Lula had fought and then made up, Lula must have said some nice things about her brother, which after Lula's death, Sierra later thought that Lula's words meant that she was suicidal at the time. John goes on to say that everybody searched for Lula's will, but he isn't certain that she even had one. He continues on and says that he knows that Lula wouldn't have left 100% of her money to John since it would have kept Yvette off, and as a lawyer he's seen some wills that have hurt people more than anything. Strike asks about Yvette's will and who stands to inherit. John is kind of startled, but eventually says that since there's nobody else, he's pretty sure that he and Tony will get most of it, while a little bit will go to some various charities. John hands over Lula's laptop but warns that he doesn't know the password, that the police cracked it and told Yvette, but she's since forgotten. Shrike isn't too bothered about this, but asks where it's been. John explains that it was in police custody for a while before all of Lula's things were given to Yvette, where they're now sitting, so she doesn't know what to do with her dead daughter's things. John promises to get Shrike an audience with both Marlene and Samay and leaves. Chapter 25. Shrike goes back to the office, the trip punctuated by random musings such as that of a statue of some deer. Back there, he's disappointed to learn that Robin is still unable to reach Mr. B's assistant and can't find anybody by the name of Rochelle on a fade. The only good news is that the temp agency hasn't come round looking for her. After Robin leaves, Shrike fusses over his aching stump leg before he starts to tumble us down thoughts about his mother. However, this novel is quickly reaching horse the dead horse levels of frustration about anything that doesn't have to do with Lula's case. Like, I'm sorry that your mother was a terrible person who had more marriages than common sense, but let's try to stay on topic here. Shrike then goes to a restaurant where he meets up with a young man who is only introduced to us as Spanner, a computer guy. Before we can actually get into business with Lula's computer, we have to first take care of some personal business. Spanner knows Charlotte as well and wants to know why calls to Shrike's flat are going unanswered. Shrike knows that Spanner doesn't care that much, so he confirms that he and Charlotte have split up. He then explains that the police have already looked at the laptop, but he'd rather look at it from a different angle. He wants the other stuff that Lula might have been looking at, like her internet history and even older emails. Spanner is surprised to find out who the laptop belonged to. After Spanner leaves with the laptop, Strike goes back to his office where he gets into bed. However, his attempt to sleep is interrupted by a text from Charlotte kindly asking him to get back to her when he can. He spends way too much time mulling over this simple message, but eventually puts the phone back on the ground and ignores it. However, if you thought that this would be the end of the chapter, you would be incorrect. We're next subject to a trip down memory lane of how it was that Shrek and Charlotte first got together. Shrek was 19 and drunk in a pub. Please remember that the drinking age in the UK is 18. He saw Charlotte across the room and decided to go over and talk to her against advice from his friends. He pointedly asked her how to get the curry sauce out from his shirt, and in his strange turn of events, not only did this somehow work, but Charlotte jumped her old boyfriend on the spot, claiming that he'd rather help Shrek get the sauce out. However, it wasn't until months following this that she told him that this had been intentional on Charlotte's part, that she'd only gone into the pub with the intention of hooking up with literally the first guy who looked at her in order to punish her then boyfriend. What a lovely woman. The only consolation to all of this is that at least the narration paints her as the unkind, self-serving person she actually is. Chapter 26. The next morning when Robin gets in, she finds that Shrek is still asleep. She doesn't want to wake him, but decides that her news is urgent, so she knocks on the door. When he's up, she tells him that she called the outpatient clinic where Rochelle said to be a patient, pretend to be Rochelle, and simply asked for the date and time of her next appointment. As luck would have it, it's literally in an hour, because of course. Before he leaves to try and catch Rochelle at this appointment, he asks that Robin look in on the legal conference that Tony claimed that he'd been attending the day Lula died. Then there's a long, tedious bit where Shrek rides a tube, which I mostly skipped over. Outside of the clinic, Shrek has no idea what Rochelle looks like other than that she might be black. She might. So he decides to do what's simultaneously genius yet moronic. He starts yelling, Rochelle, at every woman who passes by. It doesn't work, and as the time for her appointment comes and goes, he decides that she might have used another entrance. An hour later, he's still at it when he finally manages to find somebody who responds as if he'd called out her name. He buys her food from McDonald's and then introduces himself as a PI hired by John. Also, I have to highlight what Rochelle says. What do you want to talk to me for? I don't know what this is supposed to represent, some sort of regional accent, or if she's slurring her words, but what? Does he say I've got something to do with her dying? Then the narration switches to something that I can only assume is supposed to be a Cockney accent. It's somehow way more understandable, but at the same time, why? Why would you write it like this? Nobody wants to take 10 minutes to try and decipher this. Anyway, Shrek tells Rochelle that he was hired because John doesn't think Lula killed herself. However, without any hesitation, Rochelle says that Lula was depressed and took a nosedive off the balcony. Shrek struggles to get her to open up to him, which she does eventually. She tells him a bit about her personal background, which is tragic and sad, and practically a commentary about her society, I assure you. Rochelle also mentions hanging out at Lula's building and talks some about Mr. and Mrs. B, so that they were rude to her and that Mr. B was always trying to get into Lula's pants, not like Lula was ever interested. He tries to find out why it was that the two of them were friends. Eventually, Rochelle admits that she wasn't the kind of person to hang out with rich people simply because she was some kind of token friend, that the two of them bonded because of their illnesses, and that Lula wanted to be her friend to try and connect with her blackness. Rochelle is insistent that Lula never found her bio dad. Shrek then takes her back to the day Lula died when she was supposed to have met up at the restaurant in the shop with Rochelle. Shrek finds it odd that Lula would go all the way there simply to tell Rochelle that she wasn't going to be able to meet to have lunch with her. Rochelle doesn't find it odd that she had a driver, so it didn't matter if they made one stop or 20. She goes in to say that Lula was clearly in a hurry to leave simply so that she could meet up with Sierra instead. He tries to talk to her about exactly what the two of them did in the shop for 15 minutes. Lula was supposed to have been in there. All Rochelle says is that Lula tried on a dress and confirms when pressed that Lula did make a call. Shrek asks if Lula called Evan or maybe Mac. Rochelle won't confirm that it was Evan, but denies that Lula had Mac's number. She tries to leave, but Shrek tempts her with the offer of more food, which she accepts. They make chit-chat about Kieran and how the three of them used to listen to DB Mac's songs in Kieran's car, that Lula was happy to be able to meet up with Mac again soon. The narration kind of glosses over her describing being able to party and rub elbows with the rich and famous before Shrek guides her back to more important stuff. Like Evan. She tells him that Evan treated Lula poorly and often sold the story to the press. She acts like the only people in Lula's life who generally cared about her were her and Kieran, that Evan somehow treated her like somebody that he could use. After making a bit more small talk about where she's living now, what kind of work she's doing, she abruptly leaves. He follows after her a moment later and catches the tail end of her explaining to somebody that she'd been cornered by a PI. When Rochelle catches sight of Shrek standing behind her, she immediately ends the call and asks what else he wants. Shrek makes up a lie about wanting to put her in touch with Kieran about some less sunglasses. She reluctantly gives it to him and then accepts his card when offered. If Lula was murdered, says Shrek, while the cars whished by them and rain glittered in the gutters at their feet, and you know something, you might be in danger from the killer too. This invoked a tiny, complacent, scathing smile. Rochelle did not think she was in danger. She thought she was safe. The entire thing doesn't sit right with Shrek, as you might expect. He thinks that Rochelle is lying to him about her current work and that everything about her seemed phony somehow. Chapter 27. On his way back to the office, Shrek can't help but comment about how bad it sucks to live in the huge city like London where there's constant construction no matter what. I'm not sure if the author is trying to make a commentary about society or simply beating the readers around the head with more unnecessary description writing yet again. He then starts to think about how Robin had woken him up that morning, and the entire thing is kind of off-putting would be one phrase for it. Robin is literally Shrek's employee. He's literally giving her money in exchange for helping him out on the case. Her waking him up in the morning wasn't because they're in this domestic agreement. She woke him up because getting to the bottom of the Lula case is important to both of them. The only consolation prize to all of that is that at least Shrek acknowledges that he shouldn't allow any of this to happen. Shrek panics when he gets back to his office and hears two female voices. He thinks for a moment that after failing to respond to Charlotte's message last night, she came to the office now. He's relieved to find that it's only his sister instead. After Robin makes an excuse to leave, Lucy starts in about how much of a B-word that Charlotte is. Lucy thinks that Charlotte is everything currently wrong with her brother's life, that he could have married some lady named Tracy and been perfectly happy right now. This Tracy person was mentioned in passing at the birthday party and the old photos. Lucy thinks that Charlotte is the reason why Shrek and Tracy broke up, but refuses to listen when Shrek tells her that things between him and Tracy had been over long before he met Charlotte. As I think anybody would, Shrek doesn't exactly take kindly to any of this. He also refuses to move in with Lucy, mainly I think because of Greg. The narration glosses over how long it took him to convince her to leave, and as he watches her go, he thinks that she would make a good torturer. Thanks for listening to my book Snark on YouTube. New videos are up every Monday, but stick around because I sometimes drop random videos on other days too. Just as a reminder, even if you can't financially support me, there are other ways to help me out. The first is watching this video as well as all my other videos. It's also important to like and subscribe. Finally, you can share this video with all of your friends so that they can help as well. If you're already caught up with all of my videos, you can go to Tumblr for my main book, Snarks, always free and updated every morning. Newly added to Patreon is to become a member without paying. You'll get access to the same things on Tumblr, but on Patreon. Also new is a 1-week free Patreon trial, so be sure to check that out. Special thanks to Dawn, Phoebe, and Nikki for supporting me on Patreon already. If you want to hear your name in my video next week, either support me on Patreon or make a one-time donation. Do you like my snarks so much that you want me to snark your writing? I do that too. For just $6 per chapter, I will tell you how awful that your writing is. But not to worry if you feel like you couldn't take the criticism. I also offer regular book editing as well, just $10 per chapter. You can contact me on any of my social media platforms if you have further questions. If you want to read some of the things that I've written, you can purchase my works on Amazon. I have a slew of spicy short stories and 2 full-length novels. I also frequently run flash sales on my stories, and if you don't follow me on any social media, you might want to do so just so you can know when I might be offering things for free. Links for everything will be posted below. See you next week, guys!